Hello and welcome to the Fat Boss Guide to Odyn in the Trial of Valor on Mythic.
So this encounter is very similar to its heroic counterpart in both Phase 1 and in Phase 2, but there is a very small and very important change. Tanks more or less have the same job, so bring 2 of them. DPS in Phase 1 need to be balanced on both the mobs so they can transition into Phase 2, just like you've seen before. And in Phase 2, when they do come down periodically, it's very, very important that you nuke them down as fast as you possibly can, just to minimise the effects that they have with everything else that's going on at the same time, and having a ranged stat comp makes this easier than a melee one. As for healing, it's a little bit more demanding than it is on heroic, but the fight doesn't really have any tight damage requirements, so you could easily bring 5 if you wanted to, and we would recommend doing it especially for a first kill. So, let's go straight into it. Let's talk about Phase 1 and 2.
Now when Odyn casts Draw Power and spawns his 5 adds, they will brand 5 players and fixate on them. You'll have to take them to the correct rune and kill them off just like you did on heroic, so that when Odyn casts his Unearing Blast, it won't one-shot you. However, on Mythic, the Unearing Blast does significantly more damage and it will still one-shot you, so in order to survive the blast, you'll need to either use an immunity or gain a buff. Every time one of the adds dies on top of the rune, they'll reveal a buff on 4 random people in the raid which will have a colour and a rune. If you run to the correct rune before the boss casts his blast, you'll gain a new buff that simply reduces the damage you take from the new blast by 90%. So it's incredibly important that when the adds spawn, the fixated player takes them to the correct rune immediately, you kill them off fast, and then everyone with their new buffs that they've got on them goes to the correct rune to gain the shield. Do note that the fixated player can get a different coloured debuff than the one that they have from the fixate, so say you have the red ad on you, after that red ad dies you might actually need to go to the blue rune in order to gain the shield, so just keep an eye on your debuffs if you are the one who's fixated.
Now any healers watching the video, you're probably noticing that the spears do much more damage on Mythic than they do on heroic, and depending on your setup and the amount of healers you have, it can feel like you're falling behind. You just need to try and make sure that you don't use any cooldowns on normal spear damage, as it's best used on either Horn of Valor or the Unearing Blast. We actually rotate our cooldowns throughout the phase, so there is something always up for every single event where one of those abilities is either about to hit the raid or it has already hit the raid. And then we use damage reduction cooldowns such as Barrier or Spirit Link for the Shield of Light that Herja does. It's not actually needed for that particular point, but it feels most efficient to use it there.
And as for your DPS in Phase 2, it is super important that you get either Herja or him down to 85% health so you can remove them from that phase as soon as you possibly can. If you find yourself in a situation where you have the Draw Power adds up at the same time as either of the mini-bosses, then you definitely aren't putting enough damage into them. You should be using damage cooldowns on them just to make sure that they leave the encounter area before things become too messy, and even having melee DPS move there early just so they're there as soon as they have landed, so that the DPS can just wail into them is a super good idea. So just make sure you get rid of them. There isn't a huge damage requirement for this fight, just make sure they're not around for a long period of time.
And apart from those small things, everything else in Phase 1 and 2 remains the exact same as heroic. Once you've nailed that down and you manage to get your shield properly for every single blast, eventually you'll make your way into Phase 3. And again, this phase pretty much plays out the exact same way as heroic as well. Keep in mind though that Stormforged Spear, the debuff that hits your tank, deals quite a lot more damage. If you have paladins in your raid, make sure you make use of Bop. Bops are absolutely fantastic for it because they make your tanks take absolutely no damage whatsoever. Otherwise, you just need to use external cooldowns from your healers. The Storm of Justice tornadoes need to be placed around the edges of the room as much as you possibly can, just to keep the high traffic areas of the encounter room clear. And this mainly helps when you're moving from one third of the room to the other, just so you're not stood inside the cleansing flame. The only addition in this phase is that the boss will brand the entire raid with the icons that you saw when he was fixated from the adds in both Phase 1 and 2. However, he doesn't actually spawn adds, and instead you will just simply explode 6 seconds later, dealing a large amount of damage to yourself and also players within 15 yards around you that are not the same brand. To counter this splash damage effect of this ability, you must have everyone stack on preset locations with players that simply have the same debuff. We set up 5 different world markers and move them whenever we move to a new section of the room, and each time we have everyone branded, we simply move to a world marker that matches the same colour and wait for the boss to cast his Radiant Smite. Once that's gone off and you've done your splash damage to absolutely no one because you've all gone to the right target, you're good to go and continue the fight as normal, and it's as simple as that. Now for your tanks to keep in mind, this ability does have an overlap point where it comes in at the same time as spears. It's just really important that you kite far away from the raid, and when you're about to explode you don't sort of move back in because you will do a load of damage to random groups. So keep that in mind, and apart from that, there are no other overlap points. This ability always comes in when there's nothing else going on.
Yeah, the whole phase is very, it cycles as you go along. You get 2 sets of the debuffs that you need to place at the edge of the room, then you get the brands on you, and then you'll need to move. So you just do that over and over again until either you die or the boss does. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you out, then do leave a like on it. It helps us out quite a lot. And of course, a huge shout out to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You guys keep us going, so thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.